Hi, welcome to my video on trauma and neurobiology, preventative and restorative measures for counselors and their clients. This is for psychology class 672. Many people have the misconception that trauma is a specific event. However, trauma is not necessarily the event itself, but the emotional response that the individual has to an overwhelming experience and or of an event in their life. This event can cause an upsetting response that overloads the individual's system and can cause changes in the brain. Well, we know about trauma, but it can be confusing because it's more about the perception and the reaction of the individual rather than the actual event. Some counselors even go so far as to separate trauma into two types: life-threatening traumas such as rape, kidnapping, assault, or a natural disaster, and other traumas that could be considered harmless but are upsetting to the individual. That could be something like divorce or some other kind of type of loss. If something traumatic occurs in childhood, they call it ACEs. They're called adverse childhood experiences. And these include such things as molestation, neglect, and emotional and or physical abuse. This prolonged exposure to the stressor event also makes a significant impact on the brain. Trauma happens when the typical passages of the brain that can't control fight, flight, or freeze, and in some instances fawn, these instincts shut down. When this occurs, the brain continues to secrete stress hormones even when the traumatic event has stopped. The individual threat perception system is enhanced and the filtering system gets disorganized and the self-sensing system is blunted. And that's why people that have had a traumatic experience can continue to react even when a trauma is not occurring. The brain is impacted by trauma within the cortex. That's like the middle part of the brain, specifically involving the amygdala. The amygdala does afford the body a protective and a warning measure. It's set up in the system so we do flee when there's danger. It's almost like a little alarm system in there. When the amygdala sounds the brain alarm of danger, then the body is flooded with stress hormones. This is naturally a good process because the body can prepare to do what it needs to do to preserve itself. However, if an individual has a reactive amygdala when they are not really in any danger due to previous trauma, the individual can find themselves in a state of either hyperarousal or hypoarousal, meaning they're overreacting to something or not reacting at all. And this can even happen when they're perfectly safe. In this way, then it's a negative impact on the individual and their ability to regulate their emotions, behaviors, and or interpret when they actually are in danger or not. Neurobiologists or trauma specialists consider this hyper or hypoarousal, or what would be optimal, the window of tolerance. If a person if an individual receives too little activation, this is called hypo, like I said in the previous slide. The individual experiencing hypoarousal can feel absent or numbness in the sensation. If they're experiencing hyperarousals, they may feel an increase in the sensation and want to run or fight. Everyone has a different baseline and a point or amount of stimulation before it induces a response. This is considered their threshold response. These thresholds do vary from person to person. The threshold is influenced by several factors, including the type of stimuli they're experiencing, the rate of recovery, an initial arousal level, past experiences, and temperament. It is clear that traumatized individuals can experience low or high thresholds or a combination of both of these depending on the type of stimuli. If the individual has a low threshold and perceives the stimulus unsafe, it may set up an alarm in the brain. This will often lead the individual to a hypoarousal state and response in a defensive manner. And like we keep repeating, fight, flight, freeze, and a new one that's been added is fawn. The individual can then learn coping skills, grounding techniques, and or mindfulness techniques to help them return to a more calm state. Counselors themselves could have experienced trauma. They could have experienced their own past trauma, or they could develop trauma from the work that they do with others. This is called vicarious trauma, and this is when a counselor or someone in the helping profession has their own dramatic change of thoughts and behavior based on their interactions with the people that they help. Some similar terms that people use are secondary trauma or compassion fatigue and or burnout. Transference and countertransference is an intrinsic and common part of the therapeutic process. It is important for counselors to be aware of this when it could be occurring within the therapeutic relationship. Transference typically happens when the client brings forth emotions or attitudes, and these could be positive or negative, based on their past attachments and or trauma, and directs them towards the counselor. The reason the counselor should be aware of this is because they do not want to cause any more emotion dysregulation or any more trauma to the person that they're trying to help. And I know this might be, the client may feel powerful emotions about the counselor just based on this perception, but it is something that can happen, and counselors should be aware of it. Countertransference is when the counselor begins to feel differently towards the client. And these feelings also can be positive or negative, because the counselor has their own internal conflict, but they're not the clients. It is both necessary and helpful for clinicians to receive their own individual therapy. Sometimes it may be necessary if they are beginning to feel some type of transference or countertransference, or if they're feeling burnout or compassion fatigue, or any kind of vicarious or secondary trauma based on their work that they do. The clinician may also have some personal things going on in their own life that they may need to deal with. And they do not want to unknowingly reflect this or inflict any more trauma on their client. If the counselor doesn't have anything pressing at the moment, it may be helpful for them to still have someone to support them in their work. This person can encourage and support them with their own efforts of self-care, and the counselor should also be encouraged to further their education and seek out certifications in effective trauma-focused treatments. Basil van der Kolk is a author of The Body Keeps the Score book, and he is a psychiatrist out of Boston that has done a lot of research in this area on trauma and the neurobiologic response. He thinks that cultivating sensory awareness is such a critical aspect of the trauma recovery. Some effective methods are mindfulness, EFT tapping, EMDR, sensory motor psychotherapy, and the restorative properties of nature. We'll go over those in the next few slides. Mindfulness. Mindfulness is the practice of being present. It's about the individual bringing their attention to the present moment experience. The focus is on the noticing, and this should be free from critique or judgment. It's a observing of the experience with full acceptance. Many clinicians either practice this daily on their own, or they do practices to kind of guide and encourage their clients to do this on their own. It can also go hand in hand with meditation, but typically you're more focusing on the act itself. So say you're focusing on breathing, or you're trying to look deeply at an object or the movement of it. If you were to bring it into the practice of mindful eating, you're experiencing whatever it is you're eating, maybe a strawberry or something. You're focusing on the smell and the look and how it feels on your tongue. Those are mindfulness practices, and they do well to help people lessen their effects and their emotions. Next is EFT tapping. It's an emotional freedom technique, and it uses acupressure points on the body to help an individual regulate their emotions. This is something that I've been doing with myself. And I've also been showing a bunch of my clients the same thing, which they have found it very, very helpful in helping them calm down their systems. So typically you start an EFT tapping session by having the client or even yourself do a body scan, and then you think about rating it on a scale of 1 to 10. Anxiety is a typical one that people typically have. So you could say maybe I'm at an anxiety rate of a 7. Then you come up with a mantra. And the mantra could be something as simple as, I feel anxious right now, but I fully accept myself. Then you proceed to go through different spots on your body. And it does seem odd in the beginning, and people are like, what is going on? But they typically, once they feel more comfortable doing it, once you feel more confident showing them how to do it. So I'm a righty, and I typically use like 2 to 3 fingers. And you start by tapping. Now you want to do not slapping yourself, and you're not hitting it too lightly where you can't feel it, but just almost like a massage in that area. And then as you're tapping that particular acupressure point, you would say your mantra. I feel anxious, but I fully accept myself. Then you go to the next area, which would be in between the eyebrows. I feel anxious, but I fully accept myself. I feel anxious, but I fully accept myself. Then you typically go through each of the areas, ending with this and a tapping on the head. And you take a deep breath, let it out, and then you can do another body scan and see if it calms you down. It works for myself, and I've seen it work very well with clients. Nature. Nature-based therapies or nature-based activities have proven to enhance a person's emotional state. This may be due to the attunement process. Mirror neurons that we all have may try to mirror maybe the gentle flow of nature, like watching the wind, listening to the birds, or watching a stream go by. Some theories to look up in this area are the attention restoration theory and biophilia. These will give you a more in-depth look into nature and the neurobiological responses that we have to it. But studies have shown that just being in nature reduces depression, it restores attention that we have lost due to technological demands. And it's also has been known to have some physiological effects on persons, some healing properties. Other practices such as meditation or mindfulness could definitely be combined with nature to get a really effective restorative benefit. For instance, right now I'm sitting by a stream, so I could picture my thoughts maybe coming in and dropping onto a leaf and then being washed down the stream. Very mindful meditative practice. Sensory motor psychotherapy is a method that integrates our somatic processing with cognitive and emotional processing in the treatment of trauma. By using our bodies rather than cognitive or emotional as the primary entry point of processing trauma, which typically is sometimes hard to do, you'll hear some trauma specialists call this a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach. When individuals that have been affected by trauma are feeling it in their bodies, such as Basil has spoken of before in his book, The Body Keeps the Score. It may be hard for the person to think in a cognitive process. So if we can get them to direct their attention to their body processes, which is what happens in this type of treatment, but it matches the complex and interconnected effects of trauma in a way by combining the somatic therapy with psychotherapy to heal people. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, better known as EMDR, interestingly enough, was discovered in Nature by Francine Shapiro. That's why I kind of try to stay out here for this section of the thing. It's related in her book how she was walking in a park one day in 1987, and she realized on this walk she was having nagging thoughts about a problem she was having. And when she returned to those thoughts, they didn't bother her so much when she was watching her eyes move back and forth. I think it was following leaves or something to that extent. She became surprised by this occurrence, and when she began to pay closer attention to her actions, she then realized that she was moving her eyes back and forth rapidly in a certain way. This self-realization and curiosity grew into an amazing theory and a method of approaching psychotherapy. It is a complex approach that focuses on the whole person. It also uses other bilateral sensations or stimulations, such as tapping or audio. Some have combined technology with it by having the person follow a light back and forth. Either way, EMDR is a way for the body to unleash this natural processing of trying to clear our cognition thoughts. But this use of bilateral stimulation has been shown through neuroimaging to have big changes in temporal functioning. These are just some of the specialists that have contributed to some of the methods that I've shared in this video. I encourage you to look each of them up and read some of their works because they've made great contributions to rewiring of the brain and different neurological processes that we have, and how to restore that, and how to prevent things, prevent more trauma from happening. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I thank you for taking the time to listen, and you have a great day.